Okay, can everyone hear me? There might be a slight delay with the stream, maybe up to 10-15 seconds. But hopefully you can hear me. Okay. So I've got the chat on another screen here, so if I'm not facing, that's why I'm trying to keep an eye on chat. While everyone's kind of joining in, I wanted to kind of take the first little bit to kind of go over some of the course changes. There won't be a ton. Your grading shouldn't change much at all. You know, in terms of the syllabus, how it's arranged, that will stay pretty much the same. Grading policies, again, the exams are still going to be 75%. There's still 3 of them. The online quizzes are still 15%, and the attendance is still 10%. That's not changing at all. Any bonus points you've already earned, you've still got those. However, as it kind of goes into in the file here that I put up for the new syllabus, there probably will be some changes in the amount that I award for in the future. So, for example, I'm not taking attendance anymore. I don't really have a great way to do that. So, you won't necessarily, or you will not actually get any bonus points for, attending the review. You also won't put in your test ID anymore. So for those 2 things, you won't get them anymore. Just things like that. Moving forward, I'll probably award fewer points. Having said that, the exams are now open book, open note. So I don't think that that'll be too big of a concern. I will make adjustments with the grades as I see fit. I don't anticipate needing to, but I'm ready to if it needs to be done. Whatever I think the distribution is, I'll make sure to make sure that it's at minimum where I would expect it to be. So don't worry too much about the grades. Like I say, you'll have 75 minutes for the exams. You'll have a block that you can take them in. Once you open them, you have 75 minutes to complete them. There will be about 75 questions, multiple choice. Same format, only it's going to be online. A lot of people are locking the exams to where once you answer a question, you can't go back and review the question. I'm not doing that. You'll be able to go forward, backwards as you see fit. So, yeah, any questions about the overall kind of format of the course? Like I said, I tried to be as reasonable and fair as possible. So things like your bonus points, like I say, if you've earned them, they're going to be there. They're not going away. It's just in the future, anything I haven't awarded yet, probably going to cut back pretty heavily on that. Of course, the exams will be in Canvas. I had some questions about that. So a lot of good material inside this document. Make sure you go through it if you haven't already. One thing that I do want to make sure, if you do not take the exam during the window for whatever reason, there is an alternative assignment option. It is going to be a 12 to 1500 word essay, and I've got some details in there. Basically, you have a week to do it. And, as it says in there, this is not supposed to be easier than the exam. It's not to punish, but it's also to ensure that people take the exam. I also don't want to completely bomb someone's grade if they're not able to. At the same time, I don't want to incentivize not taking the exam. So just try to make a reasonable assignment. 12 to 1500 words. It's not that many. It should be about 5 to 6 pages or so, roughly. It's probably a couple hours work, possibly more, possibly less. It just kind of depends on how fast you write, I guess. But apart from that, whatever attendance grade you had for the last day we met in person, that's the attendance grade that you'll have. Like I say, if it benefits you to have it included in your grade calculation, it will. If it does not benefit you, it will not be factored into your grade calculation. I'll do it both ways and pick the highest. So, not much change for the online quizzes, of course. Those are still there, and do them as you see fit. Okay, let me address some comments now. If you have any questions about the course format or anything like that, let me know. Okay, so let me take this question. Does the book follow my lectures? It's similar. It certainly has a lot of the content that I would talk about in a given day, but I'm not going to promise that it has everything. So for example, I add some content, I take some content, I don't present some content that I think is not relevant. I would probably say it's about 80% of a match. It's certainly a great resource. If you can access the book for free through whatever means you have, it'd be very advisable to do so. And if you're having issues viewing the stream or whatever, maybe advisable to do so as well. The PowerPoints are probably the best indication of the content that I will have on the exam, simply because that's why they're out there, is to outline the content. So I am going to do the exam review. If you have any questions, let me know. I put out a document that covers every single topic, so if you aren't sure about any of the topics that are on that, certainly ask away. I don't have anything planned, but I'm happy to go through anything that you all have questions about. So someone asked about not being able to get the textbook through the link I provided. That's a bookstore link, so I don't have any control over it. The bookstore did send out an email. If you search for bookstore, you should be able to find it in there inside your email. I don't have any knowledge about what they're doing with that, or if it even includes the course, but it's certainly worth checking out. Okay, so it looks like some people are helping that person out. That's good. Any questions about the content of the course? Like I said, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. If you have a question about any of the, I think it's about 130 topics I posted. Well, some of them are topics, some of them are terms. So did everyone see the review that I sent out? Okay, so this file right here. Yeah, I'm happy to address any questions you have about any of these topics. I guess it's kind of up to you as to what you'd like to see addressed, because so any questions? Yeah, it looks like there's about 140 topics, roughly. 68 and 69. Yeah, those are. Knowledge Management System and KMS. Just know that KMS is the acronym for Knowledge Management System. Sure, I can do that. Okay. So I've got the file right here. I'll just kind of run through this first example here. So I'll go ahead and read it off. It says, business firm Clearwater has an infrastructure in place that is valued at $1 million. As is, if the facility is hit with a fire, the value will decrease by $800,000. This is expected to happen once every 100 years. Fire suppression system will cost $250,000 with annual operating cost of $10,000. Fire suppression system will last for 25 years and will cause any fire to only cause $100,000 of damage without changing the likelihood of occurrence. What should they do? So this problem gives us some key information. Right here, we know that the loss is going to go down by $800,000. So we have a cost of occurrence. It's going to be 800,000. Make sure I get the right amount of zeros there. And we also have the likelihood of occurrence because it says it happens once every 100 years. So we know that it's going to cost 800,000 when it happens, and it's going to happen 1% of years. So we have a likelihood of occurrence. It's going to be 1%. And that's just going to be 1 out of 100. And then from that, we can see that if something costs $800,000 and it's likely to happen at 1%, we just multiply those two together and we get an annualized cost of occurrence. It's going to be $8,000 because we just take the cost of occurrence times the likelihood of occurrence. Make sure we get the spelling correct there. And that's what it's going to be, for doing nothing. Just leaving it as is, that's what we're going to see. So we could also install a fire suppression system. And we see that fire suppression system is going to cost us $250,000. So we have an upfront cost and that's going to be equivalent to $250,000. And we don't just pay that once because we also pay an annual operating cost of $10,000 for 25 years. So we have annual operating cost. It's going to be $10,000. And we have lifespan cost. It's going to be 10,000 times 25 years. Because it's going to last us 25 years, we're going to pay that 10,000 every year. And that's going to give us another $250,000. Okay, so as we consider this, we also have to consider that we have a total cost of protection. And this is where we're just going to add the upfront cost to the lifespan cost. So we're just going to do $250,000 plus another $250,000. It's going to give us, of course, $500,000. And we're still not done because this doesn't actually reduce the likelihood that a fire will take place. It only is going to make it less costly in damage. So we have a new cost of occurrence is given as $100,000. And we also know that the likelihood's not going to change. A fire suppression system doesn't actually make it less likely for a fire to start. So we still have the same likelihood of occurrence. It's going to be 1%. And now we're going to have a different annualized cost of occurrence. It's just going to be the cost of occurrence times the likelihood for this. So it's going to be $1,000. And we want to add the two, well, up here I guess we forgot to do one little step, and that is, of course, to create the new annualized cost of protection. So we're just going to take 500,000 divided by 25, and that's going to give us 20,000 per year. So we have the annualized cost of protection. We want to get the total annualized cost. And it's just going to be 21,000 because we're going to add 20,000 from the annualized cost of protection to the annualized cost of occurrence, which is 1,000. Okay. So what we're trying to do in these problems, just to kind of recap, is we're trying to make sure that we're comparing two things of the same unit. So up here, we have annualized cost of occurrence, and that's an annualized form. So that means that every year we're going to estimate we're spending $8,000. We're not actually going to spend $8,000 in any year, but on average, that's how we're going to account for it to compare these two situations. So we're comparing $8,000 to $21,000, and we want to pick whichever one is less, because we've already made sure that the units are the same. So we can say something to the effect of, we would not take the prevent. What are we doing here? We would not install the fire suppression compression system because the annualized cost exceed with the installation. Something to that effect. Basically what you're doing is you're just comparing those two things. Okay, let me read the comments now. Let's see if that made sense. Okay, so someone asked, yeah, we're going to take the test on Canvas. It'll be open for a pretty generous window. It'll be a little bit more than 24 hours, but plan for it to be open all day Thursday. Once you start the test, you have 75 minutes to complete it. There'll probably be about 10 of these type of problems on the test. There would be more than there would on a standard test. You can use a calculator, you can use Excel, you can use pen and paper. You can use pretty much anything on it to solve them, but you will have probably roughly 10 of it. And yeah, you should be able to see this lecture whenever you want to. It should stay on YouTube. I don't plan to take this one down, so it's not going to get copyright struck or anything, of course. The test is going to be a very similar format to what you've seen in the past. So you'll have some questions where you'll have some word problems. You'll have some questions where you have a lot of other types of problems. Basically, what I did for the test, I quickly jotted down all of the topics that are covered, and they're all inside this document right here. So if you wanted to put notes beside each one to make sure you knew what they were, you can. It's your document. You can do whatever you want to it. But for now, hit me up with any questions that you have regarding any of these topics, and I'm happy to address them. Okay. Scroll down on the Word document. Like that. So, the word problems are going to be different, of course. There will be the same type of format. Will they have the exact same questions associated with them? Probably not, but the goal of these is the same. What you want to do is you want to take a look at the problem, and you want to see, you basically just trying to get everything to the same unit. So you have two alternatives. You can do nothing, and they give you the stuff for that, and then they offer you an alternative, and they give you stuff for that. And you're just trying to calculate what is the total cost of each. So that's the basic format of each of them. There will certainly be some different numbers, maybe some different things regarding cost, but it'll all be given in the problem. You'll just solve it. So the terms are pretty much listed in alphabetical order. It's not necessarily random. There probably is, a fair bit of repeated terms on there. Maybe they're called different things, but it's important to kind of make sure that you're aware of what they are. So if you have any questions, I can certainly take those. What I would recommend, since I'm giving out a study guide, is I would just go through each of these terms and see if you know what they are. For example, ERD. If you know that ERD is a entity relationship diagram, then you know part of what an ERD is, but you don't know the whole thing. So you would also think, what are the different parts of an ERD? Well, it has entities, it has attributes, it has relationships inside of it. There's all sorts of different things that go in just the term of ERD. And really what I'm going to make sure that you're doing on there is I'm going to have you read off ERDs and get pieces of information from them. So I may show you an ERD, and you may tell me where something is stored, if it is stored at all. That's something that you may see. You may also answer questions about where, what some part of an ERD is. For example, you may identify a relationship, tell what the relationship is, give the minimum amount of something, give the maximum amount of something, stuff like that. That's just an example. For all these, they're not going to be that complicated. For example, one-to-many, it's a relationship where there is at minimum 1 and a max of infinity. And you may also want to make sure that you know what it looks like. So it's going to look something like this, where you have a line going through. Let me draw it right quick. So you're going to have a line going through for one-to-many. You're going to have the 1 symbol, and then you're going to have the many symbol. So, stuff like that. If you can do that, I think you'll be in a pretty good place. One-to-many is going to be the data management chapter. I think it's chapter 5. Let me double check that. Yeah, chapter 5. That's going to cover all the databases. Okay, let me make sure I didn't miss any of these questions. Yeah, so of course we had all the different symbols. We had the 0 symbol. This is not the best drawing you've ever seen in your life, but I'm using a trackpad right now, so I apologize. You had the 1 symbol. So let me write 0. Then you had 1. And there was also, you could do n, where n is going to be given, so it's going to be n. And then, of course, you also had the many symbol, which is a crow's foot. And again, I mean, you may see questions on the exam where you're just reading those off and kind of making that determination. You'll only do it based on what the question asks. So you'll be given the information. You're not doing it logically. They may be illogical. They may be perfectly logical. That's kind of for you to determine, I guess. But you'll be given for those questions. Did I miss a question? Okay, any other questions? Topics you want me to address? Can also be questions about the course content, whatever you want to ask. Can I do a one-to-one example? Sure. Okay. Let me see if this is going to cooperate. Okay, does that look okay to everyone? So here's a one-to-one example right here. We have student is going to sit in one and only one seat. And the seat is going to be occupied by one and only one student. So you see, that's a one-to-one relationship between two different entities, student and seat. And of course you have the one and the one, the two straight lines there. Does that answer your question? And again, just to kind of recap, these are all going to be read by saying student takes 1 to infinite courses, and courses are taken by 1 to infinite students. So that is, of course, a problem, and you'd have to address that with an associative entity, probably call it registration or something, and just take the primary keys from the table and put it into that associative entity. Any other questions about ERDs while I have it up? So for the textbook, there's a lot of different sources. I sent out one. I believe the bookstore is doing it for free. However, that's beyond my control. Someone earlier in the chat was talking about that, so you might want to go up there and review and see what they said about it. So it depends on the test question itself as to how specific it will be. It could be a very specific question, or it could be a very general question about it. I would say it's not going to get much more specific it's not going to get more specific rather than we discussed in the lecture. So if I went into 5 minutes of detail about a topic, you'll probably see a lot more specific topic than when I just said what it was. So stuff like that. If you have any questions about a specific topic or a list of topics, maybe you have 5 or 6, certainly I could take those and answer them right now. But in general, like for B2B, B2B is business to business. I may ask a question kind of relating to what is a B2B transaction. Or I may list off a transaction and say, is it an example of B2B, B2C, B2E, stuff like that. That's stuff you're likely to see for the stuff like 28 year rule. You think, what is 28 year rule? It's saying that 20% of users are going to contribute 80% of the content. The same thing as the Pareto principle I have down here. So it's the same exact thing. It's saying that 20% of users, and then you think about what does that mean for a business? What does it mean if 20% of the users are contributing 80% of the content on a social platform? So there's a lot of things that are implied by that. And, the test is going to assume that you know what it is. And based upon that knowledge, you would then answer the question. So it's very similar to the previous test in terms of the format. Okay, any other questions about the content? And again, you can ask any question about, okay, what is an attribute in here? Let me just go ahead and go through the ERD altogether. So let me hop back into the PowerPoint here. So an ERD is a data model, and it has entities that have relationships with other entities. And it's also a diagram of that. So that's really where it gets the name from. So we have several entities on this thing here. And what the entities are, you can think of these as a table. So we have a table for students inside the database, and we want to collect certain information about our students. So based on this ERD, we see student is the entity, and we have several attributes we're collecting about the students. We have student ID, student name, and student address. So with each entity, it's best practice to have what's called a primary key. And the primary key uniquely identifies each instance, which is an occurrence of the entity. So student ID is going to be unique to each and every student. So that's our primary key. It's denoted here with an asterisk. We could also denote it with a lot of different things. We could underline it if that's the format we're using. We could also, of course, put a PK to denote primary key. A lot of different ways. But each of these, student ID, student name, and student address, are all attributes of a student. And we also have the relationships with the other entities. So we have student has a relationship with a seat, and the seat has a relationship with a student. Student also has a relationship with course in this example, and course has a relationship with student. That's what we see here. And we could also have a foreign key. I'm looking at this, I don't see any foreign keys, but there could be a foreign key. A foreign key is simply a primary key for a different table. So for example, let's say that student ID was inside of a different one of these, any of these entities here. It would be a foreign key if it's denoted as such and if it's inside of another table. Let's see. Does that answer the question? Okay, again, I can take any questions about the content or about changes in the course. So there are a good many of these topics that I put out there. If I need to explain something, tell what it is, I'm certainly happy to do so. But I don't really think that I could cover 140 topics in 45 minutes, so ask away. Sure, an example of one-to-many, I can certainly do that. Okay, so if you look at a relationship with instructor onto course, an instructor teaches at minimum one course, but there is no max amount of courses they can teach. So that's an example of a one-to-many relationship. Instructor can teach one to many courses. However, in this specific example, a course is taught by one and only one instructor. We also see a similar example down here with section, where section has one to many courses, but a class is one and only one section. Again, these don't have to necessarily make logical sense. It's simply the example you're given. You're going to answer questions based upon that. Okay, so what is the difference between e-commerce and e-business? Great question. So e-business is going to be any online business activity. So for example, right now, of course, we're seeing a lot of working from home. That's an e-business activity. That contrasts a little bit with e-commerce. E-commerce is specific activities that relate to buying and selling of goods and services. So purchasing a good or service online, that's e-commerce. It's also e-business, but having an online meeting would just be e-business. Does that make sense? Okay, yeah, brick and mortar is physical only. Then you'd also have click and mortar, which is going to be both physical and online presence, and virtual only or pure play organizations. They're the same thing. They're going to be only online locations. So number 77, Memorandum of Understanding. That's MOU. That's basically a legal, I'm not sure if it's a contract, but it's an agreement between two parties that they have certain terms that they both agree to and understand. So it's typically going to be used in things such as ensuring privacy. For example, HIPAA, FERPA, and Sarbanes-Oxley, I believe, all three require certain types of information be treated certain ways. So if you're going to house a third party, or if you're going to have a third party application, or just some third party access any of your data, you establish, in most cases, it's certainly best practice to do this, you'd have a memorandum of understanding between the two parties such that they both agree and understand that the data is sensitive. So the study guide on Canvas, I'm pretty sure it should be under chapter 2, or unit 2 rather. I don't have Canvas pulled up at the moment. Can someone double check that? I also sent it out via email, so if you have your email, you can also get it there. But I'm pretty sure it's under unit 2 on Canvas. Okay, any other questions? SQL is structured query language. It is the syntax language for database operation. You can do pretty much anything with data through it. For example, you could create new tables, you could delete tables, you could delete records, you could select records, you could print records. There's really no limitation on what you could do with it. It's going to contrast with a database management system, but not necessarily contrast. The database management system is a more friendly way, for lack of a better term, to kind of interact with data inside of a database. It has a lot of tools that you don't have to know the SQL commands to do, basically. So for example, if you wanted to insert new information, instead of doing something, I'll show you what a basic thing would look like, basic SQL query. So this is not going to be big enough. Let me do it in Word. So you'd do insert, and then you'd have whatever you'd insert, and then you'd have into whatever your table name. And you'd have to put each of the things you wanted to insert. So if you just wanted to insert certain things, you could go ahead and establish that. But it's just a lot more simple to instead use a clean interface to kind of do that with. So that's the contrast there. '64 industrial espionage. Sure. So industrial espionage is going to be any sort of corporate spying. This could be both domestic, so maybe Coca-Cola wants to spy on Pepsi. Just an example. I'm not saying that they are. That could be an example of corporate espionage. However, it could also be different countries spying on each other. For example, let's say that there's a company in the US that has a competitor in a different country, like China. Maybe the competitor in China might want to spy on their competitor to steal intellectual property, or maybe to cause the other damage, reputational damage, physical damage, lots of different types of damage. It's going to be more common in some industries than others, especially industries that are heavy on intellectual property. Different types of conversion. Phased, parallel. Sure, I can do that. It's not going to be the prettiest drawing, but I will certainly do my best. Okay, so, the whole premise is that you have two systems. You have one system you're using right now, and you have a different system that you're going to be using in the future. So what you would do for let's see, what are the different types again? So you want to see parallel. In parallel, it's quite simple. Let me select two colors here. So we have our system. Our old system is going to be used 100% capacity. And our new system is also going to be used 100% capacity. Okay, so this is in parallel. So we have them both being used 100%. Now this contrasts a little bit with phased. So with phased, we're going to have our old system being used let me switch to a brush tool. And basically, in phases, this could be a business unit, this could be a department, it could be anything that the organization splits it. It could be 10% of users, just random assignment. They're going to switch to the system kind of incrementally, in phases, so to speak. So then we have the new system is going to be growing as the old system shrinks in use. That just went away. Okay, and let me draw these out to say what they are. So this is parallel. Actually, you know what would be better if I use a text tool? Okay, this is going to be phased. And we also have a direct conversion. So a direct conversion would basically just be we're using the old system until we're not. Whoops, that's not great. And then we switch over to the new system 100%. And then lastly, we have a pilot. And the pilot is simply going to be, we're using the old system, we're doing a small pilot test, and then we're completely eliminating the old system. Okay, so a pilot test, we simply have some phase where we do testing. Once the testing is completed, we completely switch to the new system. So again, I apologize, the graphics aren't the best. I'll work on that, but for now, direct, this is going to be pilot. That's basically what you would see. Something to that effect. For parallel, you're using them both 100% the whole time. Phased, you're changing everyone over in some phase, and then direct, simply you basically flip a switch and everyone's on the new thing. And pilot's kind of similar to direct, only you are doing some pilot testing phase. Okay, so someone asked me about 0 to 1. So 0 to 1 would be you have no required occurrence of it, but there can be only up to 1. So let me see if I have an example of that. I don't have an example of that in this particular slide, but I have a 0 to many relationship. So in this case, it says professor teaches 0 to many courses, or section rather, and section is taught by one and only one professor. So if we thought about this in a little different way, maybe a professor can only teach one class a semester, but they don't have to teach any. So for a full professor, that's not uncommon, to where they teach one class a semester and no more, no less. So what we would see this would be professor teaches 0 to 1 sections, and section is going to be taught by one and only one professor. Not the best example, but that's pretty much what you would see. It's all about the minimum and the maximum. So the minimum is going to be furthest from the entity, and the maximum is going to be closest to the entity. And you could see 1 to 1, but in general, the minimum can never be larger than the maximum, because that would be illogical. Yeah, so parallel, you're using both systems at the same time to their fullest capacity. So they're both going to be used 100%. And I'm sure that at some point you'd eventually phase out the old system, but for the foreseeable future you would continue to keep both fully operational. Okay, any other questions? Again, I do want to remind you, I can answer any questions that you have right now about the exam content or course content or the course changes. I try to keep the course changes as minimal as possible. So anything on this list you're not sure what it is or you want some examples, I'm certainly happy to do that. RSS is real simple syndication. It would be where you have you basically have a feed of a couple sentences at max that you're going to get. So it's real common in a lot of news sites, news aggregation, where basically you would subscribe to different news organizations, and they would put out what's called RSS feed, and you would subscribe to that, and then you would have your customized feed of all the different sources that you cared about. So for example, if you want to keep up with politics, for example, you would subscribe to whatever news organizations you wanted to read. So maybe you wanted to subscribe to 5 or 6 different ones, you could certainly do that, and you'd have all of your information in one easy to use place. It's basically just a way to get aggregated information. So a SCADA attack is a supervisory control and data acquisition attack. That's going to be where you have some critical infrastructure system. Could be manufacturing, could be power generation, could be things like utilities, anything like that where you have an industrial control system. It's wherever that's targeted and attacked. Stuxnet is an example of a SCADA attack. If you want more information, it's not going to be an example for Stuxnet, of course, but that's a pretty famous example where, I'm not going to speculate too much, I believe it's a Middle Eastern country was allegedly targeted by a at least malware. I don't remember the specifics, but they were targeted, and it was an attempt to harm power generation. Sure, so triple constraint model, that's a good question. So for triple constraint, you're going to have 3 elements, and I want to show you a picture of it just to kind of explain it. But there's 3 main things you'd want to try to have inside of project management. So Let me get you a good good picture of that. Okay. So I think this right here does a pretty good job of it. So you have cost, you have time, and you have quality. And the general premise of this is that you can maximize two, but you probably can't maximize all three. Because you're not going to have unlimited budget and unlimited time and unlimited quality. So that's kind of what you would have there, is you would have some limitations as to what you can and cannot accomplish inside of a single project. So for example, if I had a project and I wanted it to be done very cheaply and very quickly, then it's probably not going to do very much. It's probably going to do very little. So the scope of it would be very low. However, if I had a lot of time, not a lot of money, and I wanted to have a very good quality thing that did a lot of things, it would take a very long time to do on a low budget. So you can generally maximize two things, but you can't maximize three things. So with project management, you'd want to ensure that whatever project planning that you did accounts for the resources that you have, and you have a very thorough scope that meets what you need it to do. You know, shoulder surfing is just looking over someone's shoulder. It could also technically be, doesn't have to be actually physically looking over their shoulder. You could use mirrors, for example. But it's basically just doing that to gain information you would not otherwise have. It's kind of similar to eavesdropping, where eavesdropping is simply listening to a conversation you're not a party of. And I believe that, certainly keep in mind that this is not legal advice, but it could be illegal to wiretap and stuff like that, and to record conversations you're not a party of. We do have one-party consent in many states, but not every single state. Even if with one-party consent, you're required to be a member of the conversation to record it. Okay, any other questions? Sure. So a primary key is something that's going to uniquely identify each and every occurrence, which is also going to be called an instance of an entity inside the table. So for example, let me pull back up, I'll use Visio here. So we have an entity, and let me make this a little bit bigger so you all can see it a little easier. And basically we have like a student, for example. I think student's pretty straightforward. So for student, what's going to uniquely identify you is probably going to be your student ID. Okay, then we have different attributes. I'm just going to call these name and date of birth. This is not going to be an example you'd actually use because you wouldn't be able to have name in there. You'd have to have first name, middle initial, last name, so forth. That's going to be the primary key. It uniquely identifies each occurrence of student. But maybe we have a different table in here called registration, or a different entity. I'm using them interchangeably. In the ERD, it's proper to use the term entity. So we're going to call this registration. And we're going to have a composite key where we're using two primary keys to identify this. So we're going to call the first composite key student ID. We also have course ID. And this is going to be, if I can click on it, it's going to be a foreign key, and it's also going to be a primary key. Same with student ID here. And the reason these are foreign keys is because they're referenced inside of a different entity. So student ID is inside the student table, but the combination of student ID and course ID is going to form a unique key for registration. And I should move this down to that. Let's put semester down here to identify the registration. So, I would also have a course table, of course. we'd have course ID, course name, and so on and so forth. But the whole premise is that if a foreign key is going to be the primary key inside of a different table, that's what that means. Does that make sense? Does that clear everything up? Okay, if not, let me know. Like I say, there is a delay. So SLA is going to be a service level agreement. It is basically an agreement between two parties in which they have certain elements of an expectation of service that they agree on. So for example, if you have commercial internet that you purchase, you're going to pay quite a bit more, and the reason for that is because you typically get an SLA. The SLA would say that you have no more than, say, a 3-hour downtime. Anything more than 3 hours, and you're going to have a penalty clause in there that would kick in. And the penalty clause would stipulate what the punishment is for breaking the service level agreement. So if you had a 3-hour and 1 minute outage, you might get some amount of what you paid for internet refunded. That's basically what that is. But SLAs can really say anything you want to in them. It could also stipulate that data is encrypted in a certain way. It could stipulate really anything. It's basically just an agreement of quality of service. Porter's 5 forces. Sure, I don't see why I can't do that. Let's find a good picture of it and talk about it a little bit. Okay. This is a good picture. So Porter's 5 forces is really 4 forces that contribute to the 5th force, which is rivalry. So at the top up here we have threat of new entrants. That's how likely is it that a new a new firm or an existing firm will begin to encroach on your market share. So certain things make that more likely, certain things make that less likely. Government regulation is always going to make it less likely that you're going to have new entrants, which is going to decrease the industry rivalry. Bargaining power of buyers, that is to say, how many competitors can buyers select from to make their purchases that they need. So whether that's a consumer, whether that's a supplier, or not a supplier, but it's a an intermediary of some sort, that's really going to differ and be quite a large contributor to rivalry. Because if they don't have very many choices, you're going to see quite a bit different rivalry there. Threat of substitute products or services, that's simply saying, it may not be the same exact product. So if we think about a thing like internet, it may not be fiber optic internet, but is there something that could be a substitute product or a similar product, maybe an inferior good if we're thinking in economic terms, that is going to contribute to rivalry. Because for things like internet, we can get traditional internet service, we could get satellite internet service, we could get mobile broadband. We have lots of different options there. And bargaining power of suppliers, that is to say, how much bargaining power do our suppliers have? Each of these 4 factors influence rivalry. So what you'd want to see there is you'd want to see, if you're a consumer, you'd want to see quite a bit of rivalry, because that's going to drive down the cost of goods and hopefully also lead to some additional differentiation. There's no guarantees that it would lead to additional differentiation, but it probably would. It would be quite a rare circumstance to have high rivalry and low differentiation. So that's basically what you want to do with Porter's 5 forces. Just think about these 4 factors, and then think about what are they going to do to the price of goods, what are they going to do to the availability of goods. Again, if you have a case where it's extremely low rivalry, you're going to have probably 1, 2, at most providers of a good or service. If you have very high rivalry, it means there's a lot of different people, or firms rather, providing a good or service. So SLAs and MOUs, I wouldn't necessarily say that they're they're necessarily about. I mean, so the SLAs can be used for a lot of things, whereas MOUs are typically more of some document stating that both parties understand. That's the general sense. In most cases, you're going to see that they're going to be used together. So, if you had some information you want to protect, you'd probably use both an MOU and an SLA to ensure the information is protected and that you're getting reasonable service for what you're paying for. This is talking about very expensive, business-to-business contracts. This is not your home internet. It's going to have no more than 3 hours downtime. That's what we're kind of talking about. But certainly you could use them in conjunction with each other. In most cases, they would be. Okay, any other questions? Again, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about any of these topics. Okay, so the CIA triad is going to be basically a model where you have 3 elements that you want to maximize for information security. You want to maximize confidentiality, you want to maximize integrity, and you want to maximize availability. Now, each of those things, they really determine how successful an information security initiative is. For example, confidentiality simply means that the information that you have is only accessible to those who can access it. It doesn't mean that it is accessible, but it means it's not acceptable to those who should not access it, rather. That's going to contrast with availability. So availability is saying that the information is available. It's not distinguishing between someone who should access it and is not accessing it. It's simply saying there is uptime on the system. It is accessible. And then integrity is saying that the information is correct. It's accurate and it's not modified without authorization. So you want to maximize each of those. It's kind of different than triple constraint, because in triple constraint you want to maximize 2 of those. In CIA triad you want to maximize all 3, and you want to have a successful system by doing so. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so there will not be a lecture on Thursday because it's just an exam day. You'll just take the exam whenever you feel like it on Thursday. I'm not sure when we get the grade back. It might be instantly. It might be at the end of the grading window. I couldn't tell you one way or the other, but it'll probably be one of those 2. It'll be provided to you via Canvas, of course. You'll get it back, and you'll simply have the grade. Should be pretty straightforward. Make sure you do the exam. But moving forward, we will have lectures at the regular time. They'll be a lot more structured than this. This is a review day. You can ask any questions that you want. But in terms of the general format of them, it's going to be very similar to how the regular lectures go. I'll talk about the topics. You can still ask any questions. I'll have the chat up, so if you ask a question about the topic, I'll certainly address it as we go. It's not going to be a whole lot of changes. Some classes might change more than others. I tried to keep changes to a minimum in this class. Let me take a look at these. So SMS is short message service. It is text messaging. You could see a question on there about how it's used. It could be used for a lot of different things. It could be used for marketing if you want to really annoy people. It could be used for things like picking up orders, letting people know their order status, shipping status. There's quite a few things you could use SMS for. Just knowing what it is, what it could be used for. Of course, SMS has certain limitations. Obviously couldn't send a whole book through SMS. Well, you probably could, but generally would not be advisable. They can get all out of order and cause a lot of problems. So you generally want to keep your SMS messages short. It's a very immediate way to text people. Okay, any other questions? If not, I'll hop in Teams for a couple minutes if anyone has any questions. closed source software is meaning that you can't review the source code. That contrasts with open source software, which you can review the source code. It doesn't have to be private software. Most software is going to be proprietary and closed source. There are certain exceptions to that, but yeah, it has to do with whether or not you can review the source code. Okay, any other questions? Yeah, it'll be on YouTube. You'll be able to view it after the fact. I'll make sure to put a name and stuff on there so you can find it. Alright, well, I'll tell you all what. I'm going to hop over to Microsoft Teams. Also inside the syllabus, it's called My Office now. It's kind of funny. But I'll be in there. Certainly hop on if you have any questions. I think you can voice chat pretty well. I do apologize if you hear a thunderstorm in the background. Having just a little bit of weather right now. But I will go ahead and sign off and hop on to Teams. Have a good day, everyone, by the way.